Woman gives birth to a tiger and a baby boy together. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sterile white walls of the delivery room seemed to close in around Sarah Johnson as she braced herself against the mounting waves of pain. The air was thick with anticipation, the beeping of monitors and muffled conversations of nurses serving as the backdrop to a moment no one in that room could have ever prepared for. Sweat clung to Sarah's brow as she gripped the sides of the hospital bed, her knuckles white from the strain. The weight of her unborn child, or was it children, pressed heavily on her, a burden that felt somehow more profound than the physical reality of labor. The doctors and nurses moved with practiced precision, their focus entirely on Sarah. Yet, as they glanced at the monitors, there was a palpable unease in the room. Dr. Peterson, the lead obstetrician, furrowed his brow as he examined the readings. Unusual fetal movements, he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for the attending nurse to catch. She raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Unusual how?" she asked, her voice a careful whisper. Dr. Peterson hesitated, as if unsure whether his words would sound ridiculous once spoken aloud. "It's erratic. Almost as if there are two distinct patterns, but not like twins. One is stronger." Wilder. Sarah caught the exchange, her already racing heart pounding even faster. She had felt it too, sharp, unpredictable movements that seemed too strong for a human baby. She had chalked it up to her nerves, her overactive imagination, but now, hearing the doctor confirm her suspicions, a chill crept up her spine. Something was different. Something was happening that defied explanation. "Sarah," Dr. Peterson said, forcing a reassuring smile onto his face as he stepped closer to her. "You're doing great. We're almost there. Just a little more, okay?" Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing. The contractions were coming faster now, each one more intense than the last. She clenched her teeth, tears springing to her eyes as she fought through the pain. Her husband, Tom, stood by her side, his hand resting on her shoulder, his face pale but determined. He had always been her rock, and tonight was no different, though she could see the cracks in his composure. He was worried. They both were. Then it happened. The room seemed to hold its breath as Sarah let out a final, guttural cry, and the first baby was born. A nurse quickly took the crying infant, a healthy baby boy, to the side for cleaning and examination. Relief washed over Sarah like a tidal wave. She had done it. Her son was here and he was perfect. But the moment of calm was fleeting. Before Sarah could fully process what had just happened, a strange sensation rippled through her body. A second wave, more intense and urgent than the first. Her eyes widened in shock as she realized the labor wasn't over. There's another one," she gasped, her voice trembling. Dr. Peterson's face betrayed his surprise, but he quickly composed himself. "All right, Sarah, we've got this. Just keep pushing." The nurses scrambled into action, their movements hurried but controlled. Tom looked between Sarah and the doctors, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "Another one?" "The scans never showed." "Tom," Sarah interrupted, her voice strained but firm. "I need you here. Please." He nodded, swallowing his questions as he focused on supporting her. The tension in the room was palpable as Sarah pushed again, every fiber of her being focused on bringing this second life into the world. The pain was overwhelming, unlike anything she had felt before, and for a moment, she thought she might lose consciousness. But then she heard it, a soft, almost guttural cry that didn't sound entirely human. The room fell silent. The nurses froze, their eyes wide as they stared at the newborn in Dr. Peterson's hands. He, too, seemed momentarily paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words. Finally, he managed to stammer, It's a tiger cub." Sarah blinked, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was hearing. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Peterson held the small, squirming creature up for her to see. It was unmistakable, a tiny tiger cub, its fur damp and matted, its eyes tightly shut. Its tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, its small paws flexing instinctively. A wave of disbelief swept through the room. One of the nurses crossed herself, whispering a prayer under her breath. Another stared at the cub, her face a mask of both awe and fear. Tom staggered back, his hand flying to his mouth as he struggled to process the sight before him. Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What's going on?" "No joke," Dr. Peterson said, his voice tinged with both wonder and trepidation. "This is real. I don't know how, but it's real." Sarah, too exhausted to speak, could only stare at the tiny cub. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: shock, fear, and, strangely, an overwhelming sense of love. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cub's fur. It was warm, soft, and undeniably alive. "What does this mean?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Peterson shook his head. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. No one has." The room descended into a chaotic flurry of activity. Nurses whispered urgently among themselves, some moving to examine the tiger cub while others focused on cleaning Sarah and ensuring her vitals were stable. Dr. Peterson made a series of rapid calls, his voice low and urgent as he sought guidance from colleagues and medical experts. Tom stood by Sarah's side, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with equal parts concern and awe, "how are you feeling? Are you okay?" She nodded weakly, her eyes still fixed on the cub. "I don't know what just happened, but I think I'm okay. I think we're okay." The tiger cub let out a small, high-pitched sound that almost resembled a meow, drawing everyone's attention. One of the nurses hesitated before stepping closer, her hand reaching out to touch the cub. "It's healthy," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's just like any other newborn. Except it's a tiger." As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded the room. How was this possible? Was it a mutation, a freak accident of nature? Or was there something more at play, something beyond the realm of science and reason? No one had any answers, and the weight of the mystery hung heavy in the air. For Sarah, the reality of what had just happened was slowly sinking in. She had given birth to 2 lives, one human, one animal. And though the circumstances defied explanation, she felt an undeniable connection to both. They were hers. They were her children. As she held her baby boy in one arm and the tiger cub in the other, a sense of calm washed over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever questions remained unanswered, she knew one thing for certain: she would love and protect them both with all her heart. The hours after the birth were a blur. The hospital room buzzed with activity as medical staff moved in and out, their faces painted with varying shades of awe, fear, and skepticism. Sarah sat propped up in her bed, holding her newborn baby boy close to her chest. His soft coos were a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. Beside him, nestled in a blanket, was the tiger cub. Its tiny body radiated warmth, its breathing steady and rhythmic. If not for its unmistakable stripes and small, sharp claws, it could almost have been mistaken for a large kitten. Tom paced back and forth at the foot of the bed, running his hands through his hair. "This doesn't make any sense," he said for what felt like the 100th time. His voice was strained, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the surreal events of the night. "How could this happen?" "Sarah, did anyone explain anything?" "They don't know," Sarah replied, her voice steady but tired. She looked down at the cub, her hand resting gently on its back. "I don't think anyone could have expected this. I mean, how could they?" Tom stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with worry. "Are you okay? I mean, really okay? After everything that just happened?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure if it was true. "I think so. Physically, I'm fine. But this is a lot to process." She glanced at the cub, then back at Tom. "But look at them, Tom. They're both here. They're both healthy. That's what matters, right?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging as he sat down beside her. "I guess so. But what happens now? What do we even do?" Before Sarah could respond, the door to the room creaked open, and Dr. Peterson stepped inside. His face was pale, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. He carried a tablet in one hand and a folder in the other, both of which he placed on a nearby table before addressing Sarah and Tom. "First of all, Sarah, how are you feeling?" he asked, his tone professional but laced with genuine concern. "Tired," she admitted. "But okay. The baby and they seem fine too." Dr. Peterson nodded. "They are. We've done initial checks on both of them. Your son is perfectly healthy, and so is the cub as far as we can tell. Its vitals are strong, and there are no immediate signs of any abnormalities." Tom raised an eyebrow. "No abnormalities? It's a tiger. Isn't that, abnormal enough?" Dr. Peterson hesitated, his gaze shifting to the cub. "You're not wrong. This is unprecedented to say the least. I've consulted with colleagues, and no one has ever seen or heard of anything like this before. We'll need to run more tests, both on you and the cub, to try and understand what happened." Sarah tightened her hold on the cub, an instinctive gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Peterson. "Tests?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "What kind of tests?" "Non-invasive ones," he assured her quickly. "Blood work, imaging, genetic analysis. We need to rule out any medical or biological explanations for this. It's the only way we can start to make sense of it." Sarah exchanged a glance with Tom, who nodded slightly. She took a deep breath and said, "But only if it's safe for both of them. I don't want anything risky." "Of course," Dr. Peterson replied. "We'll proceed with the utmost care." As he spoke, a nurse entered the room with a clipboard and several vials. She gave Sarah a reassuring smile as she prepared to draw a small sample of blood from the cub. The process was quick and gentle, but the cub let out a soft whine that tugged at Sarah's heartstrings. She stroked its fur soothingly, whispering, "It's okay, little one. You're okay." Tom watched the scene unfold, his brow furrowed. "What if there's no explanation?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "What if this just happened?" Dr. Peterson paused, considering his words carefully. "Then we'll have to accept that some things are beyond our understanding," he said. "But for now, let's focus on what we can learn." The tests continued over the next few days, each one adding more questions than answers. Sarah's blood work was normal, as was her son's. The tiger cub's DNA, however, was a different story. It was a perfect match for a Bengal tiger, an animal native to regions thousands of miles away from Sarah's home. There were no signs of genetic anomalies or human DNA in the cub's samples, leaving the medical team utterly baffled. "How is this possible?" Tom asked during one of the many meetings with Dr. Peterson. "There has to be some kind of explanation. We're exploring every possibility," the doctor replied. "But so far, we've found nothing that makes sense. No mutations, no genetic disorders, nothing to suggest how this could have occurred." Sarah, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "Maybe it's not something science can explain," she said softly. "Maybe there's more to this than we realize." Her words hung in the air, met with silence from both Tom and Dr. Peterson. The idea was unsettling, but it was hard to dismiss given the circumstances. Meanwhile, news of the extraordinary birth had begun to spread beyond the hospital walls. A nurse, unable to contain her amazement, had shared the story with a friend, and it wasn't long before the media caught wind of it. By the time Sarah was ready to leave the hospital, reporters were camped outside, their cameras and microphones at the ready. "This is insane," Tom muttered as he peered through the blinds in Sarah's hospital room. "How are we supposed to get out of here?" Dr. Peterson sighed. "I'm sorry about this. We've done our best to keep things quiet, but something like this, it's hard to contain." Sarah looked down at her son and the cub, both of whom were sleeping peacefully in her arms. "They're just babies," she said, her voice trembling. "They didn't ask for this. How are we supposed to protect them?" "We'll figure it out," Tom said firmly, though the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. In the end, they left through a back entrance, escorted by hospital security. The reporters swarmed the building, their shouts and camera flashes filling the air, but Sarah and her family managed to slip away unnoticed. As they drove home, the reality of their new life began to sink in. The house, once a sanctuary of peace and normalcy, now felt like a fragile bubble ready to burst. Sarah placed the cub in a makeshift crib beside her son's, the sight of them together both surreal and strangely heartwarming. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future would hold. "How do we even begin to explain this to people?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll take it one day at a time. Together." Sarah nodded, her gaze shifting to the crib. The cub let out a small sigh in its sleep, its tiny paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. Beside it, her son stirred, his tiny hand reaching out as if to comfort his unusual sibling. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever mysteries remained unsolved, she knew one thing for certain: she would do everything in her power to keep her family safe. The days following Sarah's return home were a whirlwind of adjustment, fear, and discovery. Her quiet suburban life, once predictable and routine, had become something out of a surreal dream. The media frenzy showed no signs of dying down, and though Sarah and Tom had managed to keep their address private, the story of the woman who gave birth to a tiger and a baby was everywhere. News channels ran endless speculation, tabloids invented wild theories, and social media was flooded with hashtags like #TigerBaby and #MiracleBirth. Inside the house, however, a very different reality was unfolding. Sarah had quickly settled into the exhausting yet rewarding routine of caring for her son and the tiger cub. To her amazement, the cub was remarkably similar to a human newborn in many ways. It cried when hungry, whimpered when tired, and curled up beside her son with an almost protective instinct. There was an undeniable bond between the two, one that seemed to transcend species. Tom, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with their new reality. He spent hours researching online, scouring forums and articles for any precedent or explanation. But the deeper he dug, the more questions he found. "Did you know there's a myth about tiger spirits in Southeast Asia?" he asked one evening, his laptop balanced on his knees. "They say some women can carry the spirit of a tiger during pregnancy, and it manifests as—" "Tom," Sarah interrupted gently, cradling the cub in her arms. "We don't need myths. We need answers." He sighed, closing the laptop. "I know. I don't know where else to look. Science hasn't given us anything, and it's not like there's a guidebook for something like this." "We'll figure it out," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Right now, we just need to focus on them." Despite the challenges, Sarah found unexpected moments of joy in her new life. Watching her son and the cub grow together was nothing short of magical. Her son, whom they had named Lucas, seemed to delight in the cub's presence, often giggling as the tiny tiger pawed at his blanket or nuzzled against him. The cub, whom Sarah had affectionately named Tala, was equally attached to Lucas. They were inseparable, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. But not everyone shared Sarah's sense of wonder. As word of the birth continued to spread, so did the controversy. Animal rights activists called for Tala to be removed from the home, arguing that she belonged in a sanctuary. Government agencies expressed interest in studying both Tala and Sarah, citing public safety and scientific curiosity. The phone rang constantly, journalists and strangers alike seeking interviews, explanations, or simply a glimpse of the miracle family. One afternoon, as Sarah was feeding Tala in the living room, there was a knock at the door. Tom answered it, only to find two men in suits standing on the porch. They introduced themselves as representatives from a government wildlife agency, their expressions neutral but their presence intimidating. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, we understand that your situation is unique," one of them began, his tone measured. "We'd like to conduct an assessment to ensure the safety of both your family and the public." Sarah, holding Tala protectively in her arms, stepped forward. "Tala is safe. She's just a cub. She's never shown any signs of aggression." "That may be true," the man replied, "but tigers, even as cubs, are wild animals. As they grow, their instincts can become unpredictable. We need to evaluate her environment and determine the best course of action." Tom glanced at Sarah, his jaw tight. "And what happens if you decide it's not safe?" The second man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Our priority is public safety. If we determine that Tala poses a risk, we may need to relocate her to a secure facility." "No," Sarah said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "She's not just some wild animal. She's my daughter." The men exchanged a look, clearly unprepared for such a response. "We understand how you feel, Mrs. Johnson," the first man said carefully. "But we have a responsibility to ensure." "She's staying here," Sarah interrupted, her voice unyielding. "You're welcome to conduct your assessment, but Tala isn't going anywhere." Reluctantly, the men agreed to a home inspection. They walked through the house, taking notes and asking questions, while Sarah and Tom watched anxiously. Tala, oblivious to the scrutiny, played on the floor with Lucas, the two of them chasing a small ball back and forth. The sight was disarming, even for the agents. When the inspection was complete, the men thanked Sarah and Tom for their cooperation and promised to follow up with a decision. As they left, Sarah felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She knew she had done everything she could to show them that Tala was part of the family, but the fear of losing her was unbearable. Over the next few weeks, the pressure continued to mount. The media speculated wildly about the government's involvement, fueling public debates about ethics, safety, and the boundaries between human and animal life. Sarah tried to shield her family from the chaos, but it was impossible to ignore. Strangers began leaving notes and packages on their doorstep, some offering support, others less kind. Amid the turmoil, Sarah found solace in the moments of quiet connection with Tala and Lucas. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the living room in a warm golden light, she sat on the floor with the two of them, watching as Tala curled up beside Lucas and rested her head on his tiny lap. Lucas giggled, his chubby hands gently stroking Tala's fur. "You're amazing," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Both of you." It was in these moments that she found the strength to keep fighting. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she would do whatever it took to protect her family. As the weeks turned into months, Tala continued to grow, both in size and personality. She was no longer the tiny, fragile cub Sarah had first held in the hospital. Her sleek coat gleamed in the sunlight, her movements graceful and powerful. Yet, despite her growth, Tala remained gentle and loving, especially with Lucas. They were inseparable, their bond as strong as ever. The world outside, however, remained a constant source of tension. Government officials made regular visits, each one more invasive than the last. Reporters continued to hound the family, their relentless pursuit of the story showing no signs of slowing. Sarah and Tom did their best to maintain a sense of normalcy, but it was a constant battle. One day, as Sarah watched Tala and Lucas playing in the backyard, a thought struck her. Maybe it was time to take control of the narrative. If the world was so fascinated by their story, why not share it on their own terms? She voiced the idea to Tom that evening, and though he was hesitant at first, he eventually agreed. They decided to film a video, one that would show the world the truth about their family. In it, Sarah spoke candidly about the challenges and joys of raising both a human child and a tiger cub. She shared moments of tenderness and laughter, hoping to convey the depth of love and connection that bound them together. When the video was uploaded, it quickly went viral. Millions of people watched as Sarah cradled Tala and Lucas in her arms, her voice steady and heartfelt as she said, "This is my family. It may not look like what you expect, but it's ours. And we wouldn't change it for anything." The video sent shockwaves across the globe. Within hours of its release, it was picked up by news outlets and shared across every major social media platform. People from all walks of life weighed in, some in awe, others in disbelief, and a few in anger. But amidst the chaos, a surprising number of voices emerged in support of Sarah and her unconventional family. Hashtags like #FamilyIsFamily and #ProtectTala began trending, and strangers from across the world sent messages of encouragement. In the days that followed, the Johnsons received letters and emails from parents, animal lovers, and even scientists, each sharing their thoughts on what had now become one of the most bizarre yet heartwarming stories of the decade. While the world buzzed with fascination and speculation, life inside the Johnson household carried on as normally as possible, or at least as normal as life could be when raising a tiger cub alongside a human baby. Tala and Lucas had become the heart of the home, their bond as natural as that of any siblings. If Lucas cried in the middle of the night, Tala was often the first to respond, curling up beside his crib and letting out soft, comforting sounds. Sarah marveled at how intuitive Tala was, how protective and nurturing she could be. It was almost as if the cub understood that she was more than just a pet, she was part of the family. But Tala was growing quickly, and with that growth came new challenges. Her playful nips, once harmless, had started to leave marks, and her claws, though unintentional in their damage, had begun to scratch furniture and floors. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before Tala's instincts as a tiger would become harder to manage. Yet, despite the challenges, there was never any question in Sarah's mind. Tala belonged with them. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the living room folding laundry, she heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Her heart leapt into her throat as she rushed to see what had happened. Tala sat on the floor, looking sheepish, surrounded by the shattered remains of a ceramic bowl. Beside her, Lucas was clapping and laughing, clearly delighted by the commotion. "Tala," Sarah said sternly, though she couldn't help but soften her tone as the cub looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "You can't keep doing this." She bent down to clean up the mess, sighing as she swept the broken pieces into a dustpan. Tala padded over to her, nuzzling her head against Sarah's arm as if to apologize. "You're lucky you're cute," Sarah muttered, scratching Tala behind the ears. As Sarah cleaned, she couldn't help but think about the future. Tala wouldn't stay small forever. Tigers could grow to be hundreds of pounds, their strength and instincts far surpassing what any human could handle. It was a thought that both terrified and saddened her. How could she ensure Tala's safety and the safety of her family when the cub became an adult? That evening, Sarah and Tom sat down to discuss what they both had been avoiding. "We need to make a plan," Sarah began, her voice hesitant. "Tala's growing fast. We can't ignore it." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about it too. We need help, someone who understands tigers and can guide us through this." "Like a trainer?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," Tom said. "Or a wildlife specialist. Someone who can help us prepare for what's coming." The next day, Sarah reached out to a local wildlife sanctuary. The director, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Hayes, agreed to meet with them and assess Tala's situation. When Dr. Hayes arrived at the Johnsons' home, she was immediately struck by the bond between Tala and the family. "She's incredible," Dr. Hayes said as she watched Tala play gently with Lucas in the backyard. "I've worked with tigers for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "So you think we can do this? Keep her here with us?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "It's not impossible," she said finally, "but it's going to take a lot of work. Tala's instincts will develop as she grows, and those instincts can be dangerous, even if she doesn't mean to be. You'll need to create a safe environment for her, with plenty of space to roam and proper training to manage her behavior." Tom frowned. "What happens if we can't? What if it becomes too much?" Dr. Hayes looked at him sympathetically. "If that happens, the best thing for Tala would be to live in a sanctuary where she can have the space and care she needs. But," she added quickly, seeing the fear in Sarah's eyes, "we're not there yet. For now, let's focus on what we can do to make this work." Over the next few weeks, the Johnsons worked tirelessly to prepare their home for Tala's growing needs. They converted their backyard into a secure enclosure, complete with climbing structures, a small pool, and plenty of shade. Dr. Hayes visited regularly, teaching Sarah and Tom how to train Tala and anticipate her behavior. It was exhausting work, but it was worth it to keep Tala with them. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to grow. Documentarians reached out, offering to film the family's journey, and scientists requested access to study Tala's development. Sarah was careful about whom she allowed into their lives, determined to protect her children from becoming spectacles. Still, she couldn't deny that the world's fascination with Tala had brought opportunities she never could have imagined. One such opportunity came in the form of a renowned geneticist, Dr. Marcus Lang, who had been following the story closely. He reached out to the Johnsons with an offer to study Tala's DNA more extensively, hoping to uncover clues about how such an extraordinary event had occurred. "Your story could change everything we know about genetics," Dr. Lang said during their first meeting. If we can understand how Tala came to be, it could open doors to understanding hybridization, evolution, and even the origins of life itself. Sarah was hesitant. She had seen how easily people could twist their story for their own gain. But Dr. Lang seemed genuine, and his research could provide answers to questions that had haunted her since Tala's birth. "Will it hurt her?" Sarah asked, her voice firm. "No," Dr. Lang assured her. "We'll only take small, non-invasive samples. Tala's well-being is my top priority." After much deliberation, Sarah agreed to let Dr. Lang conduct his research. The process was slow and meticulous, with samples taken from Tala, Sarah, and Lucas. Weeks turned into months as Dr. Lang and his team worked tirelessly to analyze the data. Finally, one crisp autumn afternoon, Dr. Lang called with the results. Sarah and Tom sat in their living room, their hands intertwined as they listened to his explanation. "What we found is extraordinary," Dr. Lang began. "Tala's DNA is a perfect match for a Bengal tiger, as we initially thought. But there's something else. In her mitochondrial DNA, passed down from the mother, we found traces of human markers. They're faint, almost undetectable, but they're there." Sarah felt her breath catch. "What does that mean?" "It means Tala isn't just a tiger," Dr. Lang said, his voice filled with wonder. "She's something entirely new. A true hybrid, though how such a thing is possible, we still don't know." The revelation left Sarah and Tom speechless. For all the tests, the theories, and the speculation, they were no closer to understanding the miracle, or mystery, that had brought Tala into their lives. But in that moment, Sarah realized something profound. She didn't need all the answers. Tala was here and she was loved. That was enough. The revelation of Tala's hybrid nature sent shockwaves through the scientific community, further igniting public fascination. News outlets heralded her as a biological miracle, while debates raged over what her existence meant for science, ethics, and the boundaries of life itself. For Sarah and Tom, however, the discovery only deepened their determination to protect their family. Tala wasn't just a specimen or a scientific anomaly, she was their daughter, and they would ensure she was treated as such. Life continued with a delicate balance of normalcy and chaos. As Tala grew, her playful energy seemed to multiply tenfold. Lucas, now a toddler, had become her constant companion, their bond as strong as ever. They chased each other around the backyard, Tala's striped coat gleaming in the sunlight as Lucas squealed with delight. It was a sight that warmed Sarah's heart, though it also served as a reminder of the unique challenges they faced. Tala's instincts, while still manageable, were becoming more pronounced. She had started to stalk the family's cat, a habit Sarah quickly put a stop to with firm training and guidance from Dr. Hayes. But there were moments when Tala's predatory nature would surface unexpectedly, a sharp reminder of the fine line they were walking. One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen, she heard a loud crash from the living room. Rushing in, she found Tala standing over the remnants of a shattered vase, her tail swishing with a mix of excitement and mischief. Lucas stood nearby, giggling and clapping as if Tala's antics were the greatest show on earth. "Tala," Sarah said, exasperated. "What did I tell you about climbing the furniture?" Tala let out a soft growl, her head tilting as if to feign innocence. Sarah couldn't help but laugh despite herself. "You're lucky you're cute," she muttered, sweeping up the broken pieces. Tom walked in moments later, his face lighting up at the sight of Lucas and Tala playing together. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorway, "for all the chaos, I wouldn't trade this for anything." Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Me neither. But we're going to need a lot more vases." As the weeks turned into months, Tala's growth became impossible to ignore. No longer the small, fragile cub she had once been, she was now nearly the size of a fully grown dog, her muscles lean and powerful. Her playful nips had turned into sharp bites, and her claws left marks on the hardwood floors despite their best efforts to keep them trimmed. Dr. Hayes continued to guide the family, helping them create a safe environment for Tala while maintaining the bond that made her unique. They installed reinforced barriers in the backyard, giving Tala plenty of space to roam while ensuring Lucas and the rest of the family were safe. It was a delicate dance, one that required constant vigilance and adjustment. But even as Tala's size and instincts grew, her bond with Lucas remained unshakable. One afternoon, Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Lucas toddled through the grass, a stick in his hand. Tala followed closely behind, her movements graceful and protective. When Lucas tripped and fell, Tala immediately nuzzled him, her soft growl a sound of concern. Lucas giggled, wrapping his small arms around her neck in a hug that melted Sarah's heart. "They're incredible together," Tom said, stepping up beside her. "It's like they were meant to be." Sarah nodded, her eyes misting. "I just hope the world sees it that way." The world, however, was as unpredictable as ever. While many people celebrated Tala's existence as a miracle, others saw her as a threat. Online forums buzzed with debates about whether it was ethical or safe for the Johnsons to keep her. Some argued that Tala belonged in the wild or a sanctuary, while others insisted she was better off with the family who loved her. The debate came to a head when a local news station ran a segment questioning the Johnsons' ability to care for Tala. The report included interviews with wildlife experts who expressed concerns about Tala's safety and the potential danger she posed to the family. Sarah watched the segment with a sinking feeling in her stomach. "They don't know her," she said, her voice shaking with frustration. "They don't see how gentle she is, how much she loves Lucas." Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We know the truth. That's what matters." But Sarah couldn't shake the fear that the growing scrutiny could lead to action. What if the authorities decided to intervene? What if Tala was taken away? The thought was unbearable. Determined to take control of the narrative, Sarah and Tom agreed to invite a documentary crew into their home. The crew, led by a compassionate filmmaker named Elena Ruiz, spent weeks capturing the Johnsons' daily life, documenting the love and challenges that defined their family. Sarah was candid in her interviews, sharing her fears, hopes, and unwavering belief that Tala belonged with them. "I know people are scared," she said during one interview, her voice steady but emotional. "Tala is a tiger, and that comes with challenges. But she's also so much more. She's family. She's taught us about love and connection in ways we never could have imagined. We're doing everything we can to give her the best life possible." The documentary, titled A Family Like No Other, premiered to widespread acclaim. It painted a nuanced and heartfelt portrait of the Johnsons, challenging viewers to reconsider their assumptions about family, love, and what it means to care for another being. Critics praised its honesty and emotional depth, and the public response was overwhelmingly positive. For a while, the scrutiny eased. The Johnsons received messages of support from around the world, many from families who shared their own stories of love transcending boundaries. Sarah felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that they could navigate the challenges ahead. But life had a way of testing even the strongest resolve. One evening, as the family sat together in the backyard, Tala suddenly froze, her ears pricking up. Sarah followed her gaze to the edge of the yard, where a pair of glowing eyes reflected in the darkness. A coyote! Before anyone could react, Tala let out a low, rumbling growl and positioned herself in front of Lucas, her body tense and protective. The coyote hesitated, its instincts clearly warning it to stay away from the powerful predator. After a moment that felt like an eternity, it slinked back into the shadows. Sarah rushed to Lucas, pulling him into her arms as her heart raced. "Tala," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved him." Tala turned to Sarah, her eyes softening as she let out a small chuff, a sound of reassurance. In that moment, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude and love. Tala wasn't just a tiger. She was a guardian, a protector, and a member of their family in every sense of the word. That night, as Sarah tucked Lucas into bed and Tala curled up beside his crib, she realized something profound. Their family might not fit the traditional mold, but it was theirs. It was real. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The coyote encounter was a turning point for the Johnson family. In that moment, Sarah realized the depth of Tala's instincts, not just as a tiger, but as a protector. It solidified her resolve to keep Tala with them, no matter the challenges. But it also reminded her of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Tala's wild nature was undeniable, and as she grew, so did the complexity of their situation. Weeks passed, and life settled into a tenuous rhythm. Tala continued to grow, her sleek coat now a rich tapestry of orange and black, her muscles rippling beneath her fur. She was no longer a cub but an adolescent tiger, her movements more deliberate, her strength more apparent. Despite this, she remained gentle with Lucas, her bond with him unshaken. They played together every day, their laughter and growls filling the backyard with a unique kind of harmony. One afternoon, as Sarah watched them from the porch, she felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. Tala was thriving, but the reality of her size and strength loomed over every decision they made. Sarah knew the questions people were asking, questions she herself couldn't ignore. How long could they keep Tala at home? What would happen when she became too big, too powerful, to live safely among them? The answers felt like a weight Sarah carried every day. But for now, she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the joy Tala and Lucas brought each other. "Mommy," Lucas called, holding up a stick. Tala was crouched beside him, her eyes fixed on the object, her tail flicking with anticipation. "Careful, sweetie," Sarah called back, her voice warm but cautious. "Don't throw it too hard." Lucas giggled and tossed the stick a short distance. Tala bounded after it, her powerful legs propelling her across the yard with breathtaking speed. She returned moments later, the stick clamped gently in her jaws, and dropped it at Lucas's feet. He clapped his hands in delight, and Sarah couldn't help but smile. These moments were what made it all worth it. As the days turned into weeks, the family's routine was interrupted by a letter that arrived in the mail. It was from a prestigious university, requesting permission to conduct a detailed study on Tala. The letter was polite but insistent, emphasizing the importance of understanding Tala's unique biology and the implications for science. Sarah read the letter aloud to Tom that evening, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "What do you think?" she asked, placing the letter on the kitchen table. Tom leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "It sounds like they're serious. They're offering funding resources. They clearly see this as a big opportunity. But at what cost?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't want Tala to become some kind of experiment." Tom reached for her hand, his touch reassuring. "We'll make sure she's treated with respect. If we decide to do this, it'll be on our terms." After much discussion, they agreed to meet with the university's research team. A few days later, Dr. Marcus Lang, the geneticist who had first analyzed Tala's DNA, arrived at their home with a small team of researchers. They came equipped with notebooks, cameras, and an air of reverence, clearly aware of the privilege of studying such an extraordinary being. Dr. Lang greeted Sarah warmly, his enthusiasm tempered by professionalism. "Thank you for allowing us to be here," he said. "We know how much Tala means to you, and we'll do everything we can to honor that." The team spent several hours observing Tala, documenting her behavior and interactions with Lucas. They marveled at her intelligence, her agility, and most of all, her gentleness. Lucas, ever the little showman, delighted in demonstrating how Tala would play fetch, roll over on command, and even high-five with her massive paws. "She's remarkable," Dr. Lang said as he reviewed his notes. "Her behavior is more domestic than wild, yet her instincts remain intact. It's a balance I've never seen before." As the team prepared to leave, Dr. Lang approached Sarah with a proposal. "We'd like to continue studying Tala, but we want to do it in a way that benefits her and your family. We're prepared to provide funding for her care, including building a larger enclosure and securing additional resources to ensure her well-being." Sarah hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She looked over at Tala, who was lying on the floor with Lucas, her massive head resting gently on his lap. In that moment, the answer became clear. "We'll consider it," she said finally. "But Tala's well-being comes first." "Always." Dr. Lang nodded, his respect evident. "Of course." In the weeks that followed, the university's funding allowed the Johnsons to transform their backyard into a sanctuary for Tala. The new enclosure was vast, complete with climbing structures, a waterfall, and a shaded den. Tala took to it immediately, her excitement evident as she explored her new space. Lucas, too, loved the upgrades, often joining Tala in the enclosure under Sarah's watchful eye. Despite the improvements, the questions about Tala's future lingered. As much as Sarah wanted to keep Tala with them forever, she knew it might not be possible. Tigers were solitary animals by nature, and as Tala matured, her need for space and independence would grow. The thought of letting her go was heartbreaking, but Sarah also knew it might be the ultimate act of love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah sat by the enclosure, watching Tala lounge by the water. Lucas was fast asleep inside, and Tom had gone to bed early, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. "Tala," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of leaves. "What do you want? Do you want to stay here with us? Or is there a part of you that longs for something more?" Tala lifted her head, her golden eyes meeting Sarah's. In that moment, Sarah felt a profound connection, as if Tala understood her words. The tiger let out a soft chuff, a sound of contentment, and rested her head on her paws. It was a small gesture, but it brought Sarah a measure of peace. For now, Tala was home. And for now, that was enough. But Sarah knew the day would come when she would have to make a choice, not for herself, but for Tala. Until then, she would cherish every moment, every laugh, every challenge. Tala had changed their lives in ways they never could have imagined, and no matter what the future held, she would always be a part of their family. Months turned into years, and Tala's presence in the Johnson family continued to reshape their lives in profound ways. She was no longer the cub that had fit snugly in Sarah's arms on the day she was born. Tala had grown into a majestic creature, her powerful frame commanding respect and awe. Yet, despite her size and strength, she remained deeply bonded with Lucas, who was now a spirited 5-year-old. The sanctuary-like enclosure had become a haven not just for Tala but for the family as well. Lucas loved spending time there, reading books aloud to Tala or simply lying against her as she rested. Tala's presence gave Lucas a sense of comfort and confidence, and Sarah often marveled at how seamlessly the tiger had integrated into their lives. However, the reality of Tala's size and instincts continued to weigh heavily on Sarah's mind. One summer evening, as the family gathered outside for dinner, Tala sat on the other side of the enclosure, her tail swishing lazily as she watched Lucas chase fireflies. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the tiger. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" she said softly. Tom nodded, his eyes following Tala's movements. "She is. But she's also getting bigger. Stronger." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with worry. "It's only a matter of time before we have to make a decision. She can't stay here forever, Tom." Tom reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "We'll figure it out. When the time comes, we'll do what's best for her." But what was best for Tala? That question haunted Sarah every day. Tala was happy with them, that much was clear. But as much as Sarah wanted to keep her close, she couldn't ignore the fact that Tala's instincts might one day outgrow their ability to manage her. Tigers were solitary creatures, and Tala's need for space and independence would only increase as she matured. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning. Lucas had decided to bring Tala one of his favorite toys, a small, stuffed bear, and toss it to her inside the enclosure. Tala, excited by the game, lunged to catch the bear in midair. Her powerful leap startled Lucas, and he stumbled backward, falling to the ground. Though Tala had no intention of harming him, her sheer size and force were enough to scare Sarah, who rushed to scoop Lucas up. "Tala didn't mean it," Lucas said, his voice trembling as tears filled his eyes. "She was just playing." "I know, sweetie," Sarah said, her heart racing as she held him close. But the moment had solidified what she already knew in her heart. Tala was no longer just a playful companion. She was a predator, albeit a loving one, and her instincts could not be ignored. That evening, Sarah and Tom sat together in the living room, the weight of the decision they had been avoiding pressing down on them. "It's time, isn't it?" Tom asked, his voice heavy with emotion. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It is. She deserves more than what we can give her. She deserves to live as she was meant to." The decision to find a new home for Tala was one of the hardest the family had ever made. Dr. Hayes helped them connect with a wildlife sanctuary that specialized in large cats, a place where Tala would have acres of land to roam and the care she needed to thrive. The sanctuary, located in a remote forested area, promised to keep Tala's story and her connection to the Johnsons at the heart of their mission. The day of Tala's departure was bittersweet. Lucas clung to her, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "I love you, Tala. You're my best friend." Tala, sensing the emotion in the air, nuzzled him gently, her deep chuffs a sound of reassurance. Sarah knelt beside Lucas, wrapping an arm around him as she spoke to Tala. "You've given us so much," she said, her voice breaking. "You'll always be part of our family. Always." As the sanctuary team loaded Tala into a specially designed transport vehicle, Sarah felt a mix of heartbreak and gratitude. Tala had been a gift, a miracle, and though letting her go was painful, Sarah knew it was the right thing to do. In the weeks that followed, the Johnsons adjusted to life without Tala. The house felt quieter, emptier, but her presence lingered in the countless memories they had shared. Lucas often asked about her, and Sarah made a point of showing him the updates they received from the sanctuary. Photos and videos of Tala exploring her new home brought smiles to their faces, even as they missed her deeply. One evening, as Sarah tucked Lucas into bed, he looked up at her with wide, earnest eyes. "Do you think Tala misses us?" he asked. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think she does, sweetie. But I also think she's happy. She has a big, beautiful place to play now, and she knows we love her." Lucas nodded, his face thoughtful. "I hope she remembers me." "She always will," Sarah said, kissing his forehead. "Just like we'll always remember her." Years passed, and the Johnsons continued to follow Tala's journey from afar. The sanctuary often sent updates, sharing stories of her adventures and how she had become a beloved member of their community. Sarah and Tom took comfort in knowing that Tala was thriving, her story inspiring people around the world. For Lucas, Tala's memory became a cornerstone of his childhood, a story he carried with him as he grew. He often told his friends about his tiger sister, sharing tales of their adventures and the bond they had shared. Though Tala was no longer with them, her impact on their lives was immeasurable. One summer, the family visited the sanctuary to see Tala. As they approached her enclosure, Sarah's heart swelled at the sight of her. Tala was as magnificent as ever, her coat gleaming in the sunlight as she lounged beneath a tree. When she saw them, her ears perked up, and she let out a deep chuff, a sound of recognition. "Tala," Lucas called, his voice filled with joy. Tala rose to her feet, padding over to the edge of the enclosure to greet them. Lucas pressed his hands against the fence, his face alight with happiness. "I missed you," he said, his voice soft but filled with love. In that moment, Sarah knew they had made the right choice. Tala was where she belonged, yet their bond remained unbroken. She had been a part of their family, and she always would be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sanctuary in a golden glow, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. Tala's journey had been extraordinary, filled with love, challenges, and countless lessons. And though their paths had diverged, they were forever connected by the incredible story they had shared.